Mrs. Briggs, Director of the International Institute for Facilitation and Change, and here today in the role of hostess of another Bonfire interview. As you may know, these interviews have been organized to celebrate the launch of a new publication called the Bonfire Collection. It's exactly that, a wonderful resource of the many articles, more than 200, that were published over several years online, and now we've put them together into a publication, and some of our authors have graciously agreed to share a little bit about their experience in the field of facilitation with us as a way of, sort of tipping your hat to the work that's gone into this publication. Today, I have the great pleasure of welcoming my longtime friend and colleague Ben Fuchs, who, like me, is an expat, originally from the U.S., but has spent many years and based in the U.K. and working a lot in Europe and in other places. His background was originally in psychology, but to that he's kind of a lifelong student who keeps adding new skills and understandings, especially in the realm of organizational development. So, without any more, Ben, hi.
Hi, Bea. Thanks for inviting me. It's nice to be here.
So tell us a little bit about how you got started in facilitation before we go into our main topic, which is conflict.
Right. Well, that's a good story, actually. I guess really I'd have to go back more than 27 years ago. But 27 years ago, I moved to Findhorn, which is a community in Scotland. And it's a community that is quite a large community, and there's lots of groups in the community. Every work area, every function has a group involved. And all of the community is supported by guest programs. So people come there for an experience of community or to participate in workshops or whatever. And that's basically the revenue stream for the community. The community doesn't produce goods, it doesn't grow food, it doesn't make crafts to sell. It makes its living as a workshop and conference center. So living there, I sort of spent my life in groups, either in groups of people that lived there and were working together, or groups of guests who needed facilitation. And because my interest and backgrounds in psychology and personal development, I was very interested in designing and running programs that would help people to be able to communicate more effectively, have better relationships, resolve conflicts, go deeper into themselves, find a greater sense of meaning and purpose in their lives. And so I spent a number of years kind of working with groups in that context. And I think my interest in facilitation really stems from those days when I recognized that doing things in groups is quite complicated. That groups don't always behave in an orderly and rational manner, as I'm sure you know. That particularly with the internal groups in a community, because there was no real hierarchy and decisions were more or less consensual, you had a lot of lengthy discussions in order to make decisions, and collaboration to do tasks required a little bit of finesse in managing different people's agendas and so forth. Same with the development programs, because people come, they have an agenda of their own, or they come on a program and they get certain triggers get set off. Either by the material that's coming up from the program, or indeed by each other in the group. You find yourself in a group with somebody who reminds you of somebody or pushes your buttons in some way. So what I was finding is there was a lot of things happening in groups where people's behaviors were kind of off-piste, really. So they didn't follow the script. They didn't necessarily do what was expected. People would erupt with unexpected things at any time. And part of the job of facilitation and running groups wasn't just to design a nice workshop, but actually to be able to work with what's happening live in the moment when the group goes off-piste. And how do you field and listen to and understand how people are feeling and what's motivating them and what their needs are in that moment, and manage, multiple agendas, multiple needs in a group, and try to get the group to go in a particular direction, whether it's to achieve some sort of task as a working group, or whether the task itself is development and doing some workshop activities.
Nothing like being in community if you want to get the full immersion treatment of what it is to live and work in groups. And
oh yeah, absolutely. It's a very good training ground. I mean, I've worked in lots of organizations, and I have to say that most of them are far more ordered and efficient in terms of people's time and getting things done than what I experienced in communities. But they don't necessarily get underneath all the feelings that people have. They just get on with it. In community, there's an opportunity for people to express how they feel about things, which is where the growth happens. And so I think there's once I realized that the agenda was people's personal development and transformation, and if we actually got a task done, that was a bonus. That made it easier for me.
Yeah, and this whole transformation, especially personal transformation, is not for the faint-hearted, really. Which brings us which brings us to our main focus today, which is your experience in dealing with conflict in groups.
Yeah, that was I guess over time I sort of developed that as a bit of specialization. I became known as the guy that kind of did conflict stuff.
Well, and what after all these years of experience with that, what have you noticed?
Well, it's still difficult. People are still frightened of it, and I think there's what I've learned is that it's quite a complex thing, because you're dealing with people who have different backgrounds, different personal histories, different relationship with conflict, different styles, even different definitions of what conflict is. I mean, I've been in some groups where I talked about conflict, and people really looked at me like, "Well, we don't have any conflicts," And it turned out when we talked about it a bit more, in their world, conflict meant people screaming and shouting and doors slamming and chairs overturned or whatever. Whereas for me, it was much more subtle than that. It was, well, what happens where there's disagreement, where there's where people don't like what's happening, and perhaps they don't even say something because of the hierarchy and the sense of perhaps of disempowerment, that people don't even feel free to speak. To me, that's conflict. Mm-hmm. It may not be a fight, but it is conflict. And how do we courageously have conversations about those things in a way that don't escalate that conflict or bring about the consequences that people fear, but address the real issues? Whereas their view of conflict was something quite dramatic and loud and explosive. So when they said they didn't have conflict, it took a little while for us to understand that, we mean different things. Right,
but that explosive kind of conflict is one form that it takes.
Yeah.
What are some of the other ways that conflict shows up in a group?
Well, I think conflict shows up in lots of subtle signals. I mean, I think the explosive stuff, is usually, if you really ignore stuff and let it build up, sometimes you get those explosions. But a good facilitator will notice, what you might call the weak signals long before that. And if you keep sweeping things under the carpet, eventually you get a big enough lump, you trip over it.
But, what would be an example of a weak signal?
Well, for example, somebody continually talks over other people, but nobody says anything. Mm-hmm. And you can see in the expression in people's face that there's a moment where you're watching them, and the signals they're giving are that they didn't like that, but they withdraw rather than say, "Hey, hang on a minute, I wasn't finished," or they don't take up the challenge. So that would be an example of a weak signal. Or somebody says something, there's a bit of nervous giggling in the group, and then it goes silent and it's changed the subject. Mm. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why we can't talk about that, or why that's such an edge for the group. And so again, you might not necessarily demand a group talk about that in the moment. There may be good reasons why they're not talking about it, but it's a signal of conflict, isn't it? That's what I mean by weak signals. So what I'm looking for, what are the dynamics? What's going on? How free do people feel to be themselves? Because if you're not free, if you're not able to really say what you think, and you're not feeling confident that you'll be heard, that in itself is a conflict, isn't it?
So when a group calls you in because they think they know or they think they have a conflict, how do you prepare for that?
Well, I guess the first thing is when people call me and I'm interested in how they frame the issue. I don't often get called in and say, we have a group in conflict, could you come in and help us? Sometimes that happens, but often I get, oh, we need a team development day, or oh, I think we need some facilitation, or I think we need some team coaching. And so what I've learned over time is when people make requests, I ask them, oh, that's interesting. Yes, I could do that. Well, but tell me what makes you think you need that. How did you come to the conclusion, A, that you need that, and B, I was the person to help you? And what I try and do is get to, because when people call me, it's at the end of a series of thoughts, isn't it? It's there's been a whole conversation or a series of thoughts or a process that's gone on I know nothing about, and I get their conclusion, which is they need somebody. And they need somebody to do this, whatever this happens to be. It's to facilitate or to run a workshop on conflict resolution or whatever their conclusion is, their solution. I'm interested in unwinding the thinking a little bit to find out how did they get to that conclusion? What were the steps? What were the symptoms? How did they know they needed something? How did they identify the problem for which I'm supposed to bring a solution? Yeah, and that gives me more. That's sort of a diagnostic conversation for me. Is that what you meant?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you? I mean, I've had situations. Let me just switch this. I've had situations where people call me in because they want me to give a talk. And what's the purpose of giving the talk? To make a conflict go away. A luncheon talk, something I don't really do. But the protagonists in this conflict are going to be there, and I really had to. This person was very keen and had, in my magical powers, to be able to dissolve this conflict by talking in general about I don't know what. I said, no, of course, and said no, unless we can sit down with the parties and they're willing to work on this together, there's no way I'm going to stand up there.
Well, yeah. I mean, people always want the pain-free solution.
True.
It's like if you had that, people would do it, right? We avoid the uncomfortable work that's involved, and it is uncomfortable to face into conflict. It is uncomfortable to have those conversations. There's a reason why we've avoided them. Right. Sometimes we feel unskilled. Sometimes we're frightened of the consequences. So there's always reasons why. But in the end, if we want to resolve something, we need to face into that, and we might need help and support to do that. But we need to face into it. It's a bit like I don't know, to use a health analogy. If I want to lose weight, my doctor will tell me eat less, exercise more. Right. This isn't a revelation to me, right? This isn't new information. But I always want to avoid that. It's like, no, there must be some secret, some magic pill, something where I don't have to do the hard work of eat less, exercise more. But I think there's something, in relationship work or conflict work, you do have to address some of the issues.
Well, I mean, I watched you at work with groups. You're brilliant at it, and one of the things that you do. That you just mentioned a few times in this interview is that something starts going on, and your response is, how interesting. I mean, where in the world did you get so, what's the word, equanimous, to just be kind of curious instead of freaked out when you're faced with conflict?
Well, I think curiosity is one of the meta skills of facilitation, because it does two things. One is it it invites everybody to be just as they are. You don't have to be different. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be your best self. It's just, I'm just interested in people and all their complexity and all their beauty and messiness and so forth. You know, and I think it does two things. One is it kind of it lowers the edge a little bit for people to engage, because there isn't they're hopefully they're not fearing my judgment. You know, I like there's a line Rumi says where he says, out there beyond our ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there.
I love that one. I love that.
And so for me, it's about creating that field where we can meet each other beyond that judgment of right and wrong, good and bad, right? Where it just is.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully by that, you know, through curiosity and understanding, really deep listening and understanding people and understanding why they are the way they are and what's behind what looks like difficult behaviors or whatever are strongly held values, you know, deep-seated needs, passions and beliefs and all that stuff. And, you know, it's like people don't get up in the morning and say, today I'm going to be a really difficult person. Well, most people don't. You know, they get up fighting for what they believe in. Other people might experience them as difficult. You know? So how do we get to where we can have those deeper conversations and get beyond the presenting issues to what really matters to people without judgment, without you know, without having to be right, or even without having to be consistent. I mean, in the article that I talk about this idea of 3 levels of consciousness. Obviously, that's shorthand for we're multi-leveled, but you know, at a kind of more at a level of cognitive complexity that Robert Keegan would call a postmodern mindset, I can recognize that I don't have to be completely consistent even in myself, that I can disagree with myself, I can hold different points of view, and that's okay. You know, that's part of being a complex human being.
Exactly. Now, I wonder if you get, this has happened to me, and I'm wondering if it's happened to you, that's, you know, I'm very often in the role of facilitator where I'm trying to be somewhat neutral, not unmoved, you know, not like a stone in the middle of the room, but not to take sides or to take every side in a certain way so that people feel heard. But then then it turns out that sometimes I'm with the same people or as a participant, and then they're not expecting me to such a, you know, obstreperous participant have strong feelings and so on. Does that happen to you?
I think, you know, since I don't live in community anymore, probably less. I recognize the syndrome for when I lived at Findhorn. Now, these days, my personal life and my work life are, you know, more or less separate. At least with the client-facing work. I mean, with my colleagues, that's different. But we expect each other to, you know, to be
human.
You know, well, and you know, we're warts and all kind of thing.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, going back to the model that you present in the article that is in the Bonfire collection, you talk about, you know, the one level which is this more emotional, visceral, sometimes violent kind of eruption of conflict, and then you talk about the kind that's a little more, you know, rational and let's talk about this and find a solution. And then you talk about the one that I find the most interesting, actually, which is looking, you know, at the conflict more from a systemic level. Can you talk about that for a bit?
Sure, that's my favorite one.
Well, there we go. Mine too.
Because I think it's interesting that because when we look at things systemically, then one of the ways to understand conflict is that there are contradictions or tensions within a system. You know? Sometimes necessarily so. You know? And those things get played out. The way they get played out is through people who end up in roles. You know? So classically in organizations, different roles will find one another difficult, and you can swap the individuals around, and you still find, you know, so for example, in retail, the marketing people and the people in commercial, typically there's a tension because commercial is interested in margin, profit margin, whereas marketing is interested in volume of sales. So they have different drivers and different agendas. They're rewarded for the thing they're responsible for, but they kind of they have opposing needs in that sense. For one to be successful, it's seen as a threat to the other, right? But systemically, the whole thing's set up to create that balance between the two.
It's fascinating to me that every organizational setting that I'm in suffers from this lack of communication. I mean, we sometimes call it the silos and things like that, but it doesn't matter, in academia, in the social sector, and certainly in business, that's rampant. And it seems to me to be a field where facilitation can do a lot to help any organization just talk to itself.
Yeah, I agree, and I think because people's drivers, what motivates them individually, and particularly the incentive schemes and organizations often orient people towards their own agenda, which makes collaboration more difficult, which breeds mistrust of other agendas and so forth, because in a sense they're fighting for their territory, which kind of works against organizational goals as a whole. Yeah.
Right.
So I think it's interesting that we set up we set up organizations with a purpose, and then in the complexity of running the organization, we break it down into chunks called divisions or departments or whatever. And then when each one of those has its own kind of drivers and key performance indicators and all the things that they're oriented around, they end up in exactly what you described. So I think getting those sorts of conversations about trying to understand problems systemically rather than, because the challenge, of course, is you start thinking that other person in that is making my life difficult. And actually, they're just doing what they do. They're part of the system. The system, needs them to do what they do just as much as it needs you to do what you do.
Right. I wonder, before we close, if you could just give us an example of an organization that or group where you've had some success bringing the various voices and sections together to listen to each other in a new way.
Yeah, actually, I did a piece of work with the IT division of a big organization, and met all the people in management roles. And part of it was really just getting people to talk with the whole, in a sense, to get the system talking to itself. So the first thing we did was getting people to sit with their natural group or team within their function, and to have a conversation about what really matters to us as a group. What are our drivers? What do we think we're working towards? And what gets us out of bed in the morning, kind of thing. What really matters to us? What are our key drivers? What are our aims? What we think we're here for, really. Mm-hmm. And then also to talk about what we expect from the other functions in the organization, and then what we think they expect from us as a group. Mm-hmm. What are our assumptions about what we think they expect from us? So we did that, and we had them all in their teams in a big room. And then what we did was we got them to break up, and so to meet with people from the different groups would form. So going from a homogeneous team group to a heterogeneous groups made up of all the different teams. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then what they did was each member of the team would take their group to the flip chart station where they'd done their work as their home team. So that was sort of home base, and they would take them to their home and talk them through the flip chart and say, well, this is, and kind of explain what it is what really matters to us, what we're here for. These are the things that, light up our life, and these are the things that frustrate us. This is what we really expect from others, and this is what we think others expect from us. And then just to hear some questions from the group. Yeah.
Revelatory, I imagine.
So all this is going on, and then once all that had been done and everyone did the tour, we said, right, now go back to your home group and sit in your original circle and have a discussion about what you learned from that tour.
Brilliant.
And so because people say, well, I had no idea people saw us that way, or that those guys needed that, and so on and so forth. So it really built some understanding about each other's worlds. And then we just said, okay, so now think about, what would you like to do differently as a result of what you just learned? So we started moving, So that's just an example of where things that had been tensions or conflicts or unresolved kind of problems for years with this, just getting some good communication that was beyond, that depersonalized it and put it into the functional understanding of what it's like in each other's shoes and what really matters to people and what drives them. And we did it all in an appreciative way. There was no criticisms. It was all sort of positively focused about these are our leading principles in this team. This is what we think we're here for and what we're trying to do.
Right.
Of course, which is quite different information than when you think they're there to block and obstruct our work, which is some of the assumptions that had been made.
Exactly. So
this idea that systemically there are leading principles and that different teams maybe have different ones, but also have them in a different order of priority. And I think it's really important. So when you've got if you've got your 12 kind of guiding principles, whether you call them your values or your mission or whatever, and they're all up there as a big blob on the wall, it's pretty hard to make decisions on that basis. But when you really get really specific and say these are our leading principles, and actually this is the order of priority, then you start getting really specific about, and those conversations about what is the priority in any given time and why are people holding different needs and values and principles as priorities. That's where you get to a really interesting systemic conversation that depersonalizes it.
It's an excellent example, Ben, because it really shows the importance of the process for getting at those issues. For me, the facilitator's main job is process design, figuring out how can we help people have the conversations they need to have.
Yes, indeed.
So, this has just been fascinating. I'm so glad that you were able that we found this time to chat together.
Right.
And
thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you, and we'll stay in touch as always. You really enjoyed that last interview, and I also hope that you're kind of hungry to have more opportunities to learn from experienced facilitators like the ones featured in this series. If that's the case, I have great news for you. The Bonfire Collection, a complete reference guide for facilitation and change, will be available starting May 12th. This compendium of useful information, written by working experts in the field, provides the practical tips and inspiration you need when you're working with groups. The material is organized into all of our favorite topics, including facilitation, effective meetings, participatory processes, conflict, consensus, leadership, and more, so you can easily find the content that you're looking for. The Bonfire Collection will provide you with answers to your questions about how to deal with the challenges of working with groups, tools for increasing group participation, and inspiration for supporting change through your great facilitation. It's kind of like having a personal coach at your fingertips. The Bonfire Collection comes in 3 formats: hard copy, e-ring notebook, ebook, and downloadable PDF. All contain the same great information, and you can get your copy of the Bonfire Collection at the special launch price if you buy before May 30th. Add the Bonfire Collection to your facilitation toolkit as soon as it becomes available on May 12th.